Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to Institute for Personal Development, where total consciousness is the new frontier. Kriya Yoga is the union of the individual with the divine. Join us as we explore the practices that initiate this process.
Good morning. Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. Let's talk consciousness. I am your hostess, Lisa Winton, and with me is Kenny Choi, also known as Swami Jayananda, founder of Institute for Personal Development, located here in Hampton, New Hampshire. Good morning, Swami. Thank you for being here today. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good today. How about you?
I'm doing great today. What a beautiful morning. We got some new, fresh snow out there. It's a winter wonderland for sure. And thank you, listeners, for tuning in. Today on The Voice of Yoga, we will be talking about equal rights in honor of Dr. Martin Luther King, who said, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Relativity for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. Karma, what we put out is what we get back." We will show how, with all these imbalances on one level exist, and that on a spirit level, we are all equal. And for those truly spiritual, nothing else matters. Listen as Swami explains how union with the divine will empower an individual to rise above the cycle of death and rebirth to experience true freedom. So join the Kriya Yoga Spiritual Advance to get the light in your soul to experience the benefits of Prana Power. So Swami, let's talk about that concept of civil rights. You know, when I do my research for the show, I came across a passage and it says, civil and political rights are a class of rights that protect individuals' freedom from infringement by governments, social organizations, private individuals, and which ensure one's ability to participate in the civil and political life of the society. Now, my question to you is, if we all have these rights, we assume that we're born with these civil rights, but isn't what you said earlier? Isn't what we put out is what we get back? So we have to have this sense of freedom from ourselves to be able to march forward.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right there, because it's really just the whole concept of the term equality that I think we really have to look at the different levels of reality that we exist on simultaneously, because I really like the way C.S. Lewis talked about it in Screwtape Letters when he talked about I'm as good as you are. The whole thing that we're not all equal. And we're not all equal in all things, kind of a thing. So if you try and approach it from a tangible level, then the whole thing really falls apart. But when you look at the concept of that, the concept of equal rights, I think, is that it's not a question that I'm as good as you are. It's a question that we should all be treated equal with regard to, just like we talked about civil rights, that there are certain inalienable rights that we should all have access to. But I think what happened is that we try to come from a different, that we're all equal, and I think that's where it kind of starts to fall apart.
So you're saying that on the physical plane, we are born with the rights to have freedom. Freedom from oppression and freedom freedom to do whatever we want in this country. We have that kind of freedom. But are you saying that on a spirit level or emotional level, astral level, that's where we differ in what we would call freedom?
Yeah, again, it's even the concept of freedom. becomes kind of like the psychological sand trap, because just like you said, freedom somehow has come down to mean my ability to get whatever I want, when in fact freedom on a true experiential level is your ability to not want anything, or even better yet, to desire nothing. So freedom is actually freedom from a dimension of reality, freedom from duality, which requires this joining with the unified state. And that's an important, I want to say, perspective to start to assume, because the problem with the world isn't God's love for humanity, because on a spirit level, we all have equal rights. We all have prana on an equal level. And it's this life force that supports us and sustains us. But in yoga, the term is called namaste. Namaste means I bow to the divinity within you, because we are all equally divine. However, the real problem with the world is humanity's love for this concept of God, because we're not all equally sensitive or aware of this invisible, intangible source of sustenance. And so that's where I think our problems start to lie. And when we try and fix it from the outside in, it really never really offers you any kind of solution. The real solution is found with this joining with the divine.
I'm wondering about when we talk about oppression and what happened back in the 60s and the early 70s, and you know, everybody's trying to get their civil rights and their freedom in this country. But would you say that when we go back to what we talked about before, what surrounds us is within us? So maybe on a macrocosmic level, we all had to experience that time when all that was happening, because maybe that is what's going on inside of us. We're actually oppressing ourselves from turning to our divinity, and maybe that could be the macrocosm of the microcosm, what's happening in all of us.
Yeah, I think that's spot on, really. I mean, just like what you said, you look at what's going on around you, and it is mirroring things that are going on within ourselves, and the whole collective consensus, and the whole thing of civil rights and freedoms. But I think a lot of it kind of went the wrong way in a lot of respects, especially even, say, for example, that whole revolution that kind of took place when the Beatles came back from India and they were singing about peace and love, and we misunderstood it for being promiscuous and doing drugs. and it really started to deteriorate.
That's interesting that you say that, because I find when I read books or watch movies, it seems to be that people still use alcohol and drugs or whatever to express this feeling of socialism, and to have fun, they need these outside influences in order to be able to have that. Like we saw that movie the other day, and these two adults were bringing these younger adults out. And said, well, let's go. We're going to have some fun and go out on the town, and had all these younger people started drinking and doing all these other things, and it just seemed that was such a sad part of the movie where they had to resort to that in the movie for entertainment, and that was supposed to be acceptable. We were supposed to be able to accept that kind of behavior. So I don't think that helps us when we watch things like that. And I have to go back to that saying that's out there, and it says, be the change you wish to see in the world, as opposed to, well, I don't want to be oppressed anymore, so, I need to take up guns and whatever and do all these other things to make it happen.
Yeah, I think it's an education thing. I think most of us are basically doing the best we can with what we know, and we've just been kind of inundated with this, it's Miller time or whatever. This is how we experience what we call fun or happiness. But we also have to understand that there's a big difference between worldly happiness, intellectual happiness, and eternal happiness. That we're not comparing apples to apples. And without good leadership, without example, like you say, become the change you want to see. And it's not until the human being separates from their attachment to duality and connects and joins with truth and wholeness do they themselves understand what these experiences are. And the way it is right now, we really don't have leadership in how to do that because the communities that have taken over our religions have failed so bad. Religion to relink doesn't do what it was supposed to do. We don't make this conversion to a different source of sustenance. We join a group or a community, and we pretend to be doing better than we are. But if we understood that this human mind-body complex just doesn't run on particles or waves, and that it requires this conversion to join with this other source of sustenance, and you make this internal connection and you see the changes that it brings, then of course you're a good example. But until you yourself do that, you really don't understand what we're talking about. So there is a lot of confusion. And if your only understanding of happiness is through toxic substances, then there you have it.
So if a person really tries hard and they try to be that change that they wish to see, so because if we change what's inside of us, and what you're saying, that our outside world eventually is going to have some change. It has to happen. So, but what if it doesn't completely happen? So are you saying that now we're dealing with forces from a karmic level, and that, of course, as we discussed earlier, is definitely harder to make that change because you have to have a conscious awareness of what that might be.
Yeah, and that, I think, brings us back to the 100-monkey theory, that you really need to get critical mass. You need to get 100 people that are growing psychologically and spiritually in order to start to impact the collective. Because right now, the playing field is almost like a wall. It's definitely not level. And for the most part, we really don't have a clear understanding of what freedom is. And if we had a better understanding, and if we had leadership with regard to points of passage and rites of passage, and we had individuals that began to grow psychologically and spiritually, then, of course, we would have an ability to impact this collective consensus, and it would make it a little bit easier for everybody else.
All right, great. Well, thank you for that. So I think we're going to take a moment to hear a word from our sponsors. So listeners, we'll be back with you in a few moments.
Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate.
If you are looking for a Samadhi-based experience, IPD Kriya Yoga has the goods. A complete yoga program that includes the practices and the process. Starting with the separation from mother, including the labors and tasks of the hero and the return as a whole person. Practice makes perfect only when practice is whole. Kriya Yoga is a path of action, knowledge, and devotion. Samadhi, or total consciousness, is experienced by knowing and doing with devotion. Call or click now and get started. 603-929-0303 or www.ipdtransform.com. Namaste.
And welcome back. For those of you just joining us, you're listening to The Voice of Yoga, and we are talking consciousness. So, Swami, what I'd like to do maybe is open up the phone lines and see if anybody has any questions for you today on our topic. So, listeners, if you have any questions, you can go ahead and ask your question for Swami right now. All right, so Swami, I have a question for you, and actually relates back to our conversation that we had on karma. So in the beginning passage, I had said that we need to empower an individual to rise above the cycle of death and rebirth to experience true freedom. So we know that is a difficult road for us to do. So how do we know if we have changed our karmic patterns? How do we know this on a conscious level that we can definitely do that in this lifetime, rise above that cycle of death and rebirth?
Well, I think the whole key is in grabbing onto this other source of sustenance. It's kind of like the concept of levitation, that to be able to rise above the forces that are pulling you back to the earth. That if you were to say, for example, just to jump, you could, and then all of a sudden 2 seconds later you're back on the ground, because the forces are just too much for you to overcome them. But if you were to grab something outside of the earth, like if there was a tree branch above you and you hung onto the tree branch, then you could lift your feet off of the earth and sustain it for an extended period of time. And the same is true with a spiritual practice, is that you actually connect to this other source of sustenance, this invisible, intangible resource. And that's what gives you the leverage to lift yourself out of duality, where you actually now have objectivity, or the term that we use in yoga is called detachment. But it really requires attachment to this other resource, that you don't just detach from the earth. It's like trying to jump off of the earth. You're going to find yourself right back where you started. But if you have this connection to this resource that's more reliable and more dependable, that's what gives you power. It gives you leverage. And so it's not that difficult as you had said. It's as simple as what we start to do is we start to recognize what it is that we really do need, our number one need. And we just start to use that as a symbol to validate ourselves, that we change basically the reward circuits in our brain, we change the neurological pathways, that now all of a sudden we look for what we really do need instead of something that is dualistic. And once you've internalized this other source of sustenance, this invisible, intangible resource, then some changes start to happen, real changes. This concept of apotheosis, this process of the individual becoming divine. This is where the caterpillar now becomes a butterfly. This is where the human in the larvae state now becomes the human in the adult state. And some of the things that happen with that are this whole thing of that your nature changes. Because when we draw from things visible and tangible, we are of a low animal nature. We move towards what we want, we move away from what we don't want. I mean, it's pretty basic and fundamental. But if we are attached to things that are invisible but tangible, we will be of an equally low human nature, which means that we do have a little bit more discernment than if you are of an animal nature, but it's still not the same as if you are attached to things that are invisible and intangible, which will now make you of a divine nature. Right? There's an old expression, to err is human, to forgive is divine. That your divine nature is virtuous. And it's not something that you have to try and do. It's because your perspective changes. Your whole sense of self is now aligned with a part of you that is eternal. That you're now an intricate part of something bigger than just seeing yourself as separate. And you see that what you're putting out is what you're getting back, but you also see that the same soul that animates me is animating you. And so what I do, which is very different than when we are separate and we still see ourselves as separate.
So once we start making that change, once we, as you say, take that right turn and return to spirit, it actually changes us physically. And then wouldn't you say that is actually going to change how people perceive the energy that's around us? Because I feel like we all have a certain energy that we put out, and then people will either repel from that energy or they'll be attracted to that energy, and they want to become like you, and that's how we make these changes.
Yeah, and then that's the physics of spirituality. The problem with it is like attracts like. Yeah. And the human in the adult state is not attractive to the human in the larvae state. It's threatening. And so one of the misconceptions is that if it's spiritual, it should feel good. Well, not initially. You should actually be threatened by what it is that you have just experienced because it is threatening to your nature. That's the physics. See, like attracts like. Misery loves company. That birds of a feather flock together. So humans in the larvae state actually are attracted to humans in the larvae states. One of the things you want to be able to do is look at who's around you and be able to evaluate and look and say, what's their level of consciousness, what's their degree of awareness, because it will give you clues as to what is it that I desire. What is it that I'm drawing from? Because if you're drawing from the physical world, then you will be of this limited sense of self. Your mind will be small and your feelings will be reduced to insatiable cravings. But if you're drawing from this invisible, intangible resource, you will be free from any unnecessary dependencies. That's true freedom. That's liberation.
And again, I've said this before in the past. I mean, it sounds so easy, and yet we have such a hard time making that leap to trust in that is exactly what's going to happen. I think it's that fear of the unknown that, if I give up all of my wants, that the universe is not going to provide for me, and that's what is scary for a lot of people, is in trusting that we're put on this earth to be able to find our connection to that one spirit that animates us, and I think that's what's the frightening thing for most people, is that, well, if I do this is my safe road. I know exactly what to expect. If I make that right hand turn and give up everything and trust in that one spirit, it might let me down.
Yeah, it's you don't know what's going to happen. But the one thing is that the sum of the parts doesn't equal the whole, kind of a thing, and trying to complete ourselves in the physical world and trying to create, equality on a physical level will never happen. This concept of peace on earth doesn't happen until we renounce the world and we give up our dependency upon things that are visible and tangible, and we join with this thing that requires faith. And the thing about it is, and that if you do it the way that we do yogically, I think it's very simple. That if you really use your number 2 life-sustaining force, breath, as a handle, because you can hold your breath, put yourself in a real life-threatening situation. Mm-hmm. Now, if your next breath isn't there, you only have a couple minutes to live. And, of course, the real question is, why am I not celebrating something that is this important to my existence? Why am I searching for something that I could live the rest of my life without? And so, again, that's the conversion. You have to change how we think. And I personally think that if you have good instruction, that this can be done relatively seamlessly with a tremendous amount of ease, because you're not abstaining. You're not trying to give up, and you're not trying to perform conduct without the support of this source of sustenance. That you're actually turning yourself over. All you're basically trying to do is use what you need to produce the feeling you're happy. And then, of course, once that happens, then you have kind of changed what it is that you're looking for. And then once you've internalized the right symbol to produce the feeling that you're happy, then the panel's wired.
All right, well, great. Well, I think it's about that time we start closing down our program. So, listeners, I'd like to invite you out there to visit our website. You can follow Swami on Pinterest and Twitter and Facebook. And also available to you, listeners, are the online classes you can access through the website, www.ipdtransform.com. Click on the link for the online classes, and it will direct you to Powwow, and from there you can make your selection. But keep those comments, questions, and curiosities coming, because Swami does enjoy hearing from you. But be sure to tune in next week. We'll be talking about Mercury Stations Direct. I believe Swami's got a great program set up for you for that. And Swami, any final thoughts today on our program, Swami?
Well, I would like to encourage people to try and search out their equality on a more intangible level, because to try and measure yourself against those around us, we will find that we are not all equal. It could get frustrating. But on a spirit level, the Lord is providing us with everything that we do need, and we are all equally divine. And from there, I would wish everybody a good day. Namaste.
And thank you for listening to our program, The Voice of Yoga. This is Lisa Winton, along with Swami Jayananda, signing off. Have a wonderful Kriya Yoga kind of day. Namaste.